You know, we're all taught to see women as these caregivers, right? Nurturers, the angels in our lives. But what if that whole image is just a mask? Today, we're going to dive into the world of female criminality. And believe me, it's a world that totally challenges our deepest assumptions. It forces us to ask, what happens when the person you'd never suspect is the one you should have been watching the entire time? Okay, so this quote from Honoré de Balzac, it just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? Woman's virtue is man's greatest invention. Think about that. For literally centuries, society has pushed this idea of women as being just inherently pure, selfless, the moral compass. It's this incredibly powerful image that's been around forever. That right there is the critical question, isn't it? What happens when that virtue becomes the perfect cover for something, well, something much darker? This is where things get really interesting, because it takes us right into the psychology of crime. So, to really get this, we've got to go back in time a bit, to this old idea called the angel in the house. This was basically the perfect Victorian woman. She was supposed to be totally selfless, living only for her husband and kids, with no dreams or desires of her own. She was the moral center of the home, the perfect angel. And the thing is, the ghost of that angel is still hanging around today. We're all socially conditioned from day one to see women as the nurturers, the caregivers, and because of that, we have this massive blind spot. I mean, if you don't expect someone to lie to you or deceive you, you're way less likely to spot it when they do, right? And that creates the absolute perfect setup for someone to take advantage. So, what happens when someone takes that blind spot and exploits it to the absolute extreme? All right, let's just completely shatter that angelic image for a minute and look at the most chilling example there is. The female psychopath. It's not a common diagnosis for sure, but the reality of it is bone-chilling. Okay, so before we go any further, let's be super clear on what we're talking about. Psychopathy isn't just a movie trope for being evil. No, it's a real clinical personality disorder with a very specific checklist of traits. We're talking a total lack of empathy, zero remorse, pathological lying, and being an absolute master of manipulation. Now here's where it gets really fascinating. The core traits of psychopathy are the same for men and women, but how they express it can be totally different. Male psychopaths, they're often way more physically violent, and they tend to go after strangers. But female psychopaths, they often use what's called relational aggression. Think vicious gossip, social sabotage, turning people against each other. And when they do get violent, their victims are way more likely to be people they know, even family. Their motivation's different too. It's usually not about power and domination. It's about money or profit or getting something practical they want. And if you want a real-world example of this, well, there's probably no one more terrifying than Aileen Wuornos. She didn't just break the mold, she absolutely demolished the public's idea of what a female killer was supposed to be. And look at this number, 32. That is so important. That was her score on the Hare psychopathy checklist. Now this checklist is the gold standard for diagnosing psychopathy, and anything over 30, well, that's the clinical cutoff. So this wasn't just the media going crazy, this was a real, validated clinical diagnosis. I mean, her profile is just a textbook case. She murdered 7 men. She showed zero remorse. And she kept changing her story over and over again to manipulate everyone. The cops, the public, you name it. Her case proved without a doubt that this kind of cold, remorseless violence isn't a guy thing. It has nothing to do with gender. But extreme violence like that is really just one side of the coin. There's another form of female criminality that's way more common, and honestly, in some ways, it's even more sneaky. This is where those stereotypes we talked about earlier, they become the perfect weapon. Let's talk about pink-collar crime. So what is pink-collar crime? Basically, it's financial fraud committed by women who are in jobs that have traditionally been held by, well, women. We're talking bookkeepers, office managers, secretaries, clerks. These are jobs built on trust, right? And they often have very little oversight, exactly because of those angelic stereotypes. And just think about the sheer opportunity here. A wild 90% of all bookkeeping jobs in the US are held by women. 90%. These are the gatekeepers. They're the ones who see every dollar coming in and every dollar going out. Seriously, if you are looking for the perfect cover to commit fraud, this is pretty much it. And oh my gosh, there is no better example of this than the case of the lunch ladies. These were 2 sisters, Joanne Pasquarelli and Marie Wilson. And one source described them perfectly, saying they look like your wizened Italian aunts who always insist you eat more. You can just picture them, right? So, how much did these two sweet, harmless-looking lunch ladies steal? Get this, over 15 years they stole nearly $500,000, $478,588 to be exact, in cash, from a school cafeteria. The sheer audacity is one thing, but that number, it just shows you how devastating this kind of crime can actually be. And their method? It was so simple. They were the cashiers. So at the end of every single day, they just underreport the total amount of cash they took in. And the difference, they just pocket it. They did this every day for over a decade. And nobody noticed. I mean, who's going to suspect the lunch ladies? Okay, so we've seen the what and the how, but that leaves the big question, why? What's the motivation here? Well, it turns out the reasons that drive female offenders are often really different from the guys. For male offenders, a lot of the time it comes down to ego, power, domination, wanting to look like a big shot. They might even justify it by saying, hey, I'm the breadwinner. But for female offenders, it's usually much more practical. It's about profit, yeah, but also about stability and security. And get this, they often justify it through their role as a caretaker. They tell themselves they're doing it for their family, for their kids. So this all leads to a really important question. How do we protect ourselves and our businesses from this kind of thing, from this perfect criminal cover? Well, there's a saying in the fraud prevention world that I think is the most important thing to remember here. It's this: embezzlers don't get away with it by acting all shady and suspicious. No, they get away with it by building trust and then completely exploiting it. The crime works because the criminal isn't a master of disguise, they're a master of trust. They become that person you'd never, ever suspect, the one you lean on. And that trust, that's the weakness. It's not a security system, it's the hole in your security system. So, what are some actual things you can look for? Well, research points to a couple of major behavioral red flags. The number one sign, showing up in over 40% of cases, is someone living a lifestyle that just doesn't match their paycheck. Fancy cars, lavish vacations. The other big one is getting a little too close with a vendor or a customer. That can be a sign of kickbacks or other shady deals. Look, it's not about being paranoid and suspecting everyone. It's about being aware of behaviors, not relying on stereotypes. And that really brings us to the final thought here. That whole angel in the house thing might sound like some dusty old idea from another century, but our instinct to trust people based on these old gender stereotypes, it is alive and well. And it really makes you think, in your own life, at your own job, who are you trusting blindly?